At SABC News, correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joins us now live from New York. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. So we have 2 U.S. citizens killed by federal immigration agents in a single month, with experts now saying this marks a dangerous escalation in immigration enforcement, and President Trump also saying he's reviewing everything. Just help us frame what we are seeing.
Reviewing everything, he might say, but the White House posture is that immigration or anti-immigration enforcement operations across the country, Unati, will continue. The posture is not shifting. You see the president presenting a vibrant defense of federal agents and their pursuit of what he describes as illegal aliens in the United States, illegal criminal aliens. But you're also beginning to see the standoff develop and entrench itself between the state of Minnesota and the federal government here. What are the levels of jurisdiction that state authorities enjoy, for example, in investigating Alex Pretti's killing at the hands of Border Patrol agents, right? And so they have applied for access via a federal judge for, first for the evidence to be preserved, but also for them to have access to the investigation. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Investigation actually had a judicial warrant for access to the crime scene, but were prevented by federal agents. And so you're seeing the standoff between federal jurisdiction and state jurisdiction because there's a lack of trust between the two, right? They're not cooperating in terms of the immigration enforcement apparatus in the state. They want the federal agents to leave the state. In fact, Governor Tim Walz said, this is no longer a political debate we are having. We are now having a moral debate, and called this a federal occupation of the state. So we're watching 2 federal court processes today, Unati. One, a judge must decide whether local state authorities can have access to the investigation because they believe that would allow for greater transparency given the standoff between the two. And another federal judge is going to decide whether this operation can continue given the fact now that 2 U.S. citizens have been killed in their protest action, during their protest action against this very brazen federal enforcement of immigration law here. And so what will play out in the courts today. But the posture between state and federal, very much the focus here, as you now see this take on political dimensions in Washington, D.C. as well.
Yeah, I want to probe that further. I mean, also when you consider that Trump says that he may withdraw agents, you know, in these cities and states, etc., but we don't have concrete, you know, confirmation as yet. So 2 people have already died. I mean, I want to just delve in a little bit more, Sherwin, on the ICU nurse, Alex Pretti. I mean, we saw those devastating scenes of his coffin being draped with the U.S. flag. In terms of what we know versus what we don't, you know, key questions, as you've also been asking, remain unanswered about how he was shot, and now these processes from a legal perspective are ongoing. Authorities acknowledge that at least 2 agents were wearing body cameras. I mean, is there any explanation so far for why that footage has not yet been released?
Well, the federal investigation is holding these kinds of matters very close to their chest, right? And this is why you have the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension that is seeking access to the investigation. They were also blocked from participating in the investigation of the killing of Renee Good 3 weeks ago. So there is a suspicion from the state here that the federal government is not playing open cards because they are seeking to protect perhaps possible egregious actions by federal agents in the execution of those duties, in the, you know, what some are calling an execution of protesters in the United States, right? Those are views that are being expressed by protesters on the streets of Minneapolis. And so, you know, the concern here is that shaping the narrative has become the play here. So very quickly after the killing of Renee Good, you had people like Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, come forward and sort of describe her as a domestic terrorist. On Alex Pretti, Kash Patel, the FBI director, suggested that Pretti broke the law by carrying a concealed gun at a protest. But the Minneapolis police chief quickly undercut that by saying he had a license to carry a concealed weapon, asserting his Second Amendment right, which is sacrosanct, particularly in the Republican Party in the United States. And so what he was doing was protesting legally despite having a concealed weapon, which has now become the flashpoint in terms of shaping the narrative moving forward. Stephen Miller, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, said he referred to Pretti as an assassin who tried to murder federal agents, and claims that officials that he was there to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, said Pretti was brandishing a gun intent on perpetuating violence. Now, you look at the video, and you know for a fact that the man was not brandishing a gun. He might have had a weapon on him, which I can't see in the video. But he was holding a cell phone when the scuffle ensued that ultimately led to his demise here. So shaping the narrative has become very much the player, and this is why you are seeing the standoff between the Minnesota and local officials against the government here, because they do not want the narrative to be shaped by political persons. They want to follow the facts, and that's what's been missing here. Normally, statements, at the beginning of an investigation say, let's wait for the investigation to complete itself before you pronounce on who did what and why. And that's the mudding of the waters we're seeing in this process as it plays out.
Because it was, the latest case, and I know you touched a little bit about the reaction, but how is Pretti's death resonating within the community, particularly among healthcare workers, local professionals? I mean, we've seen those videos of people really just shocked in terms of, could this really be happening? Have things escalated too far?
There is a different kind of reaction this time around. Now, and it's been nationwide, but I'll just give you a sense. There's a growing backlash, Unati, even from lawmakers in Congress. You're seeing Republicans now step forward and call for independent investigations. You have Republican senators saying that there needs to be collaboration between the state and the federal government here. You're also seeing Democrat senators now say that they are not going to approve and vote for appropriations bills that include the funding of ICE to the tune of $10 billion. And so Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, has warned that Democrats will not vote for this. They will block the appropriations funding for ICE unless they begin to see changes on the ground. The Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, right? There's a business element to the protests that are happening in Minneapolis and Minnesota. Shops are closing. There is a lag, a drag on business sentiment and confidence. The Business Chamber of Commerce in Minnesota saying that it's calling for de-escalation towards a durable solution. You have the Minnesota Police Chiefs Association calling on the White House to have a meeting with them because they are concerned about public safety that is being caused by the presence of federal agents in Minnesota. So this is difficult, complicated stuff in an election year. Do not let the political sphere be diluted here. This is an election year. In November, we will determine the control of Congress, the control of the House of Representatives and the Senate. What are the political implications of these visuals being perpetuated around the country of Americans standing off against militarized federal agents and dying in the process? What is the political cost of that to the Republican Party and perhaps the Democrats if they perhaps don't stand up enough here moving forward? And it is the political equation that might come to bear in terms of how federal and state officials behave moving forward.
Yeah, as we wrap up, I mean, you just brought another thought to the fray, especially what you're saying there towards the end of the show. And I mean, the question then is, we've heard, the officials speaking, but just how strained are those relations right now between Minnesota officials and federal agencies on the ground, particularly when you talk about the political consequences given the elections? We heard in that clip that we played earlier on, one official asking, what is the plan, Mr. Donald Trump?
Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, asking what the plan is here. Look, they've called this a federal occupation. They do not want federal agents in their state. They believe it is creating public safety concerns. They are concerned about the safety of their residents, the safety of their businesses. And so this is a huge fissure between the Democratic-led state establishment in Minnesota and the Republican-led establishment in Washington, D.C. And the question now becomes which side is going to blink first. The lack of trust here is pretty evident. Normally, in a case like this, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Investigation would have jurisdiction in that area in terms of a use of force, a killing, as we saw with Alex Pretti and with Renee Good. They have been denied access by the federal government to participate in the investigation. This is something they are now challenging in the courts, and you are hearing a narrative from a bipartisan group of lawmakers in Washington calling for that collaboration to resume. Where we go from here is really going to be determined by, I think, first a federal judge today that has already ruled that the federal investigation must retain and not destroy evidence. But the very fact that a judge has had to say that tells you exactly where we are today.
Absolutely, Sherwin. Thank you so much for that comprehensive analysis and, of course, update. Sherwin Bryce-Pease on the ground for us in New York City.